Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating psychology and the literal neuroscience behind why putting your phone face down and just ignoring a draining text can feel so incredibly good. I mean, if you've ever felt a massive wave of relief just from stepping away from a relationship, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get right into it. So why does it feel so good to put your phone face down? Society loves to label people who walk away from relationships as cold or difficult or somehow broken. But what if we completely flip that script? What if we reframe this act as a scientifically backed mechanism of brilliant self-preservation? Today, we're going to look at the exact hardware and the psychology of what happens when you finally decide to just walk away.
All right, Section 1, the accumulation of disappointment, the myth of the impulsive cutoff.
Okay, let's start by totally dismantling a major myth here. Cutting someone out of your life is almost never a sudden, impulsive decision. The famous psychologist Carl Jung actually called this the accumulation phase. It's this quiet, years-long process. Think of it like a giant scale. In step 1, chronic givers absorb pain and they quietly catalog ignored boundaries. Then, in step 2, they experience this constant string of unmet needs, being emotionally available for everyone else, but getting these super shallow responses in return. This just keeps building up until step 3, where their unconscious mind literally calculates that the relationship is running at an unfixable energy deficit. Bam, the door slam. It's definitely not a sudden emotional snap, it's a highly calculated psychological response to years of data.
And this perfectly explains why certain people experience this pattern so intensely. It comes down to something called high trait introspection. This is basically the psychological tendency to intensely process, analyze, and map out every single interaction, conversation, and hidden social dynamic. So for folks with high trait introspection, emotional data is processed kind of like computer code. Every tiny comment that felt dismissive, every broken promise, every weird inconsistency, it all lingers in the background. It adds up until staying connected feels way more exhausting than silence. You don't just let things go because, well, your brain is literally built to notice the patterns. Moving right along to Section 2, your brain in protection mode. This is the actual hardware behind the silence. Now that we've got a handle on the psychological buildup, let's look at the literal hardware inside your nervous system. What actually happens when you hit that breaking point? Well, according to Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, withdrawing from draining people is absolutely not a malfunction, and it's definitely not a character flaw. It's actually your brain flawlessly executing a shutdown, or a dorsal vagal protection mode. See, your nervous system is constantly running background checks on your environment. When it calculates that a social engagement is costing you more energy than it's giving back, it shifts gears. It physically shuts down to conserve your finite energy against what it sees as a social threat. And because of this brilliant protective mechanism, people who cut others off usually have these intensely heightened threat detection patterns. We're talking about clocking fake friends by month 2, recognizing early love bombing, sensing the sting in a disguised compliment, or just feeling completely exhausted before a conversation even starts. So why does this happen? Well, a 2023 Nature Neuroscience study, along with research from the University of Iowa, proved that early emotional stress essentially turns the brain's amygdala and prefrontal cortex into a precise early warning social instrument. Your brain catches these patterns way before anyone else's does. So no, you aren't being paranoid. Your biological instrument is just incredibly sharp.
All right, Section 3, Jung and the door slam, becoming whole, not cold.
When this hyper-aware social instrument finally triggers, the results are truly profound. Think about this. You cannot become yourself while constantly draining your energy for people who don't value it. When you finally trigger what Carl Jung called the door slam, the person doing the cutting off feels an instant, overwhelming sense of freedom. Jung saw this not as an act of cruelty, but as a process of individuation. It is a totally necessary withdrawal from the collective. It's how you stop sacrificing your authentic self just to maintain some false sense of harmony. You are literally withdrawing to protect the real you. However, we do have to look at the root of this reflex. Psychologist Murray Bowen found that for a lot of people, this instinct traces all the way back to childhood environments where love was conditional or maybe moods shifted really unpredictably. This creates what he called an emotional cutoff. It essentially trains the nervous system to reflexively view distance as the absolute only safe sanctuary to regulate emotional pain. Basically, connection became risky, so distance became safe. Which brings us to Section 4, boundaries versus emotional walls. This is all about protecting yourself versus isolating yourself. And here is an absolutely crucial nuance we have to explore in this explainer. How do you know if your nervous system is actually protecting you, or if it's just keeping good people out of reach? It really comes down to understanding the difference between boundaries and walls. Boundaries are selective. They're built on recognizing repeated patterns of emotional drain. Walls, on the other hand, are proximity-based. That means you're blocking everyone out purely from a fear of closeness. If your relief comes from removing a specifically draining behavior, like, say, someone who only ever calls when they need something, that's a healthy boundary. But if you feel relief simply because you're avoiding closeness altogether, you might be building a trauma-driven wall, and that keeps out the good right along with the bad.
Section 5. The power of selective connection, redefining the aftermath.
Okay, so if you're correctly setting boundaries, the aftermath of walking away needs a completely new vocabulary. Society constantly confuses loneliness and solitude, but they are not the same thing. Loneliness is wanting deep connection but suffering from its absence. But solitude is actively choosing quiet for peace, restoration, and cognitive recovery. Science actually shows that for highly perceptive individuals, solitude is not a deprivation of connection at all. It's a restorative state of genuine sanctuary. When your phone is finally quiet and you feel peace instead of panic, that right there is the restorative power of solitude. Now, we do have to be a little careful with this power. CDC data clearly shows that prolonged total social isolation increases the risk of heart disease by 29% and stroke by 32%. That is massive. So physically speaking, the goal is never to have zero connection. Completely walling yourself off actually has a literal biological cost to your body. The true goal here is quality. Have you heard of the Harvard 75-year study? It's the longest study of its kind ever conducted, and it found that the single strongest predictor of a long, happy life is the quality of your close relationships, not the quantity. This brilliantly illustrates that the sweet spot is never a zero connection. Instead, it's about curating a small, highly selective circle of the right people, people who genuinely see and value you. Quality is literally everything. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to leave any guilt behind you. And I want you to ask yourself honestly, is there someone you cut off where you felt pure, absolute relief? And is there someone you cut off where some part of you still kind of wonders? Honestly, how you answer that is going to tell you everything you need to know about whether your silence was a brilliant boundary of self-preservation or just a wall of fear. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.